Around the world, many people think of New Zealand as a progressive, egalitarian place. Left-leaning Australians look across the Tasman with envy.
I am by no means the first woman to multitask.
At a young feminist leader with a social conscience who came to power promising kindness and compassion.
I'm also a huge admirer of New Zealand Prime Minister, and I'm going to say personal friend, Jacinda Ardern. In 2017, there you go. There you go.
So you might be surprised to learn that inequality is rife here. The average house in Auckland now costs over $1 million New Zealand dollars, and the average rent is almost $600 a week. New Zealand's housing crisis is pushing its most vulnerable people into desperate situations. And the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic is about to make things much worse.
We hear the Prime Minister and her government talking about governing with kindness and compassion and, taking a different approach to the way that we do politics. But that's kind of just rhetoric when the reality on the ground is incredibly unkind.
Every morning, struggling families wait outside the doors of the AAAP, seeking help to access emergency grants from New Zealand's welfare system. Ricardo and his team are on the front line of the housing crisis.
Auckland Action Against Poverty is a volunteer-led organisation that has been operating in Auckland for 10 years now. We do advocacy with low-income communities who are receiving a benefit, most of them, but also working families, to ensure that government agencies such as Work and Income provide them with their legal entitlements.
We've got all the appointments ready now. We've got everyone's names on the board. So take a seat, guys, and we will be calling you one by one, okay?
The majority of people we work with are being squeezed out of the rental market. They can barely afford their weekly rent or maybe homeless.
Good morning,
Auckland's become one of the most unaffordable cities in the world, ranked just behind Sydney and Melbourne. For many middle-class households, high rents mean they can't afford to buy a house. But families like these can't afford to buy food.
Today you're here on top of all those issues, you're also needing a food grant. Yeah.
The housing crisis in Auckland looks like an ordinary working family on the minimum wage, spending 70% of their income on rent and being left with very little to feed their children and living a couple of paychecks away from homelessness. And this is why so many families are coming week by week to get a top-up, because they just cannot afford to cover those basic costs.
Is there a tassi out there? No tassi? Okay, otolose. I'm Kafa Mamaya. I am a AAAP advocate. I'm here to help the people. So what are you needing help with today?
Food and petrol.
How much money do you have left when you pay your rent and your bills?
Just $100.
$100 a week for everything else, food and baby and...
Who else have you
It's not
done?
even enough, to be honest. No, it's not.
People on benefits like Otolose can get emergency grants from WINZ, Work and Income New Zealand. But these need to be repaid, creating a debt trap.
Is your payments high or anything? Are you repaying them over $40 or anything, do you know?
$60.
$60? So, that's too much.
You said you came to work for AAAP partly because you knew what it was like to struggle. What do you know about struggle?
I have been homeless in the past. I've stayed in the car in the past.
Really?
For 2 weeks, yes, until I got into a boarding house.
What's that like?
It wasn't good. That's all I could say. It didn't feel good. It wasn't a safe environment to be in. Being homeless, no, it's not a safe place to be at all. And it's cold. It was cold being out there.
Vulnerable families are struggling to keep a roof over their heads, and a record 14,000 households are now on the waiting list for public housing.
The reality is that this government is not putting enough resources to even house half the families on the waiting list over the next 4 years. We're accepting that over 8,000 families are going to go without a safe place to call home.
We dealt with you because you were homeless, eh? Yep. So what happened?
Yesterday, this man was facing a night on the streets until AAAP helped him access emergency housing.
We're barely coping with the number of people that are coming to our doors needing help. We've got a Labour-led government that is not committed to lifting benefits, that is not committed on building enough public housing, and what does that tell our families out there?
The government has just agreed to increase most benefits by $25 a week as part of its COVID-19 support package. But last year it ignored an expert report recommending that benefits be increased by almost 50%, while spending $41 million on emergency accommodation in motels.
Housing people in motels was supposed to be a short-term solution to the ballooning waitlist for state housing, a way to stop people being forced to sleep in their cars or on the street.
In a rich country like New Zealand, it should be possible to create the conditions where everybody has access to a decent home. And that's not happening at the moment.
Tens of thousands of people are homeless in this country, so the government's pumping nearly $200 million into helping them get a roof over their heads.
New Zealand's not the only country in the grip of a housing crisis, but it's had real political consequences here.
One of Labour's key policies is fixing the housing crisis.
Public concern about housing affordability helped elect Jacinda Ardern.
We'll build 100,000 starter homes for first home buyers over 10 years.
With its flagship Kiwi Build program, the government promised to flood the market with affordable housing. But there were problems from the start.
Only 258 houses have been completely built so far under the scheme.
Yes, Kiwi Build isn't happening at the pace we want. I've acknowledged some of the issues we've faced.
But it's not as though the government's been sitting on its hands. Auckland's in the middle of a housing boom, thanks to new policies encouraging development. And the government fulfilled a promise by banning many foreigners from buying existing homes. But it's those most in need who are still being left behind. There are now an estimated 41,000 homeless in New Zealand.
Now, we knew right from the beginning that New Zealand had a staggering homelessness issue. We were up there with amongst the worst in the OECD, not a thing that people know our affluent country for.
Those on the street are just the tip of the iceberg.
I'm taking you to see Vika, an old friend of mine, because of her living situation. Her and her children and her partner there. The house is overcrowded and her and her partner sleep in the lounge.
70% of the homeless population live in overcrowded houses, like the one Kafa wants to show me.
This is it?
Yeah, that's her house right there.
They're called the invisible homeless, people camping out in living rooms or garages because of a lack of space.
Hello.
They're far more likely to be Maori and Pacific Islanders, and it turns out they really are invisible.
Nice to meet you. I'm Amos. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for letting us come see you in your home.
Yeah,
I hear there's a lot of people living here.
Yeah, there's 8 of us.
8? But there's only you home at the moment?
They all went and hide.
They all ran and hide?
They don't want to be on the camera.
Oh no, where are they?
They're all in a room.
In a room? Seriously, there's a room in this house with 8 people in it.
Yeah.
Vika's partner and 6 kids eventually come out of hiding, but only when we agree to blur their faces. Shyness isn't the problem. It's shame at the way they live. 8 people squeezed into a small public house, with mum and dad forced to sleep in the lounge.
There's judgmental people nowadays, so we don't like bringing people over. And when people come over, we hide so that they don't know that we stay here. Yeah.
Are you just talking about me or other people?
Oh no,
as
like
well?
this is normal, eh, Mum?
That's just normal for them. When people come here, they run and hide in the room. not just you, it's just them. It's, even the church people, they come and knock on the door, they run and hide. Because of the situation in the house, I think.
First time I've seen you all out.
Really? They hide from you too?
Yeah.
Oh.
They're big kids, like they do need their own rooms, you know, look at them, they're giants. For teenagers, oh, and they do need their own space now, you know.
During a coronavirus pandemic, overcrowding will pose a serious risk to public health, but there's little hope of a short-term fix. Vika's been on the waiting list for a larger house for 3 years.
Do any of you have ambitions or dreams when it comes to a home?
To own a house.
Why would that mean so much to you?
It'll just feel like you can have bring your family over, bring whoever you want. Yeah, you don't need to worry about everything else.
You don't have to hide.
Yeah. It's just your own property that you own, that you can do whatever you want with.
But home ownership has been declining in New Zealand for years. Most Kiwis need to tough it out in the rental market, where the landlord is king.
My name is Peter Lewis. I'm a full-time residential landlord. I set out to buy one house per year. That was my initial plan. My goal was to have a sufficient income that I could afford to do within reason what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it.
And have you achieved that goal?
I have achieved that now.
What do people think of landlords in the middle of a property crisis?
Most people dislike landlords. Well, the image of any landlord is someone who dresses like a monopoly man, drives around in a Rolls Royce with a writing crop in hand and throwing widows and orphans out into the snow, which of course is ridiculous because any sensible landlord does not get rid of a tenant unless he's got a really, really good reason.
And you own one of these places, or?
One on the left, the one on the right.
You own this one too?
Yep. And then I bought the one at the back on the left. And then I bought this one here on the right, and then I bought that one there on the left.
Hang on, so how many houses do you have in this one block?
5.
5 places?
Yep.
Wow, you must like this neighbourhood.
Yes, I do, and it's also handy because then I can come and fix a tap in one place and paint a window in another and go and hang a curtain in another one, and I don't have to restart the car each time.
It's very practical. After you.
Thank you.
Unlike most investors, Peter hasn't bought property for the capital gains. He wants to make a good living off the rental income, and that means he does everything himself.
Good afternoon, Tony.
You must have to really be a jack of all trades.
You can get people to do it, but of course each of them would charge you $100 travelling time.
As property prices have gone up and as rents have gone up, have you also noticed an increased interest, desperation among renters looking for properties, competition?
What I have noted, of course, is that the tenants I do have are now tending to stay a lot longer than they used to.
Because there are less options out for them if they chose to leave?
Yes, it's probably more difficult for them to find another property. Hi there. Right, what we're going to do is our normal property inspection, which is required by the insurance. So it's just a matter of wandering around, checking everything's okay.
So, what's Peter like as a landlord?
He's actually good. Like, compared to my last landlord, like, Peter's onto it as. Like, he always keeps us included with everything that's happening. His communication is great.
PowerPoints are all okay.
He seems super thorough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
You like the attention to detail?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 52.2. So that's the same as last time, which means nothing's got worse.
You've had like other experiences with landlords that are different?
So this is the second place that we've rented, but before this we used to rent a garage. for $450 a week.
You rented a garage, what, to store things in?
No, to live in.
You lived in a garage? A $450 a week garage?
Yes.
What happened there? That was like all you guys could find?
Yeah, we were desperate at the time, and
How-
nobody would take us on.
How long ago was this?
About a year ago-ish. And
So-
we stayed there for about 2 years.
So this is you, your partner, your
And
kids?
the 2 girls, yeah.
4 of you living in a garage?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Must have been cold in winter?
Yeah, and because they had like makeshift windows in there, but they were like heaps of gaps. So every time it rained, the water would come through.
I just can't get over that you were living in a garage for 2 years. As New Zealand enters a lockdown in response to COVID-19, the government has announced a rent freeze. But before the pandemic, some landlords were clearly taking advantage of the housing crisis, giving all of them a bad name.
We are unacknowledged, we're unappreciated, and we're vilified. And as I said to someone the other day, if you really want to be hated in New Zealand, say you're an Auckland landlord.
Right.
But Peter has a plan to help tenants gain more rental security, offering a 10-year lease. It would give tenants the freedom to do what they want with their home, but don't expect landlords to replace the curtains and fix the sink.
Right, I'll just have a wander around the outside.
Yep. The landlord would provide the shell of the building and be responsible for the outside maintenance. The tenant would basically rent a property that had the floor, the walls and the ceiling. They would put in their own flooring, they would put in their own light fittings, they would do their own wall decoration, they would put in their own cabinets.
And this is the model they have in places like Germany and
That's right.
Scandinavia.
And then that would allow them to keep pets, because if the pet damaged the floor, that landlord wouldn't care because it's the tenant's floor.
Rubbish is okay, lawn's okay, garden's okay.
And that is an option I would like to see, and I think it would make a big difference to the housing market.
Okay, well I'm very happy as usual with the condition of the property. Thank you.
It's alright, you have a good day.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
As it turns out, my tenants are secure now, but I'm not going to live forever. And when I die, they're going to be looking for a new home.
But there's little political appetite for any significant reforms to the housing market.
Today, I am announcing that the coalition government has ruled out implementing a capital gains tax.
Like Kiwi Build, this was another reluctantly broken promise for Jacinda Ardern.
This was an issue that we just couldn't form consensus on, but I also had to acknowledge it was also an issue that Labor had campaigned on for multiple elections, and we just hadn't been able to succeed.
This is an election year, and when it comes to the provision of housing, the government doesn't have a lot to boast about. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Housing Minister Dr. Megan Woods turned down our repeated interview requests. New Zealand goes to the polls again this year. Do you think the government's going to pay a political price for its failure to do more?
I think the government is already paying a price in its polling when it comes to a lack of delivery. The crisis is pretty bad in New Zealand. So if you think about our house prices in places like Auckland, they're nearly 10 times the average household income. We will see continued pressure at the bottom end of the housing market in social homelessness. And we're not going to act because there is just so much inertia built into the system. And the political pressures are just simply too big to overcome quickly.
The winners are the people who are already on the property ladder. But for young people in particular, the crisis will play out for years to come.
New Zealanders believe in homeownership as kind of one of those rites of passage. It's seen as something that makes you an adult, a fully functioning member of society. So when you don't reach it, you've got this sort of sense of being disconnected, of not achieving, being a failure.
Auckland is ground zero for New Zealand's housing crisis. But Northland is New Zealand's fastest growing province, with many Aucklanders, often Maori, moving here in search of more affordable housing. That's pushed up prices in Kaitaia, a small town in one of the country's most deprived regions.
It's very much a reversal of the 1960s urban drift, where 95% of all Maori lived in the rural areas and moved down to the cities. We're seeing a reverse of that today in 2020. There are no private rentals available, so many of the families are living in makeshift cabins, buses, cow sheds, lean-tos, and overcrowded living conditions. And it's going to get worse.
So, kia ora and welcome to Whareora. This is a gateway into the property. We bought 50 acres of land up here from a local farmer, turned it into medium density housing. These are the homes that were initially designated to be demolished and landfilled.
Maori community leader Ricky Houghton mortgaged his own house to buy this land in the hope of giving his community a new lease on life. He then found abandoned and derelict public houses in Auckland and trucked them up here.
And this was just farmland before?
This was just barren farmland here.
You created your own little suburb, haven't you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's take a look around. Yeah, they look pretty shabby now.
Yeah, they've been sitting in Auckland and school holidays, and you get a lot of young people go in there and kick holes in walls. They steal the spouting, the copper spouting off these houses. What's the bottom step?
Ricky has a bold and unconventional plan for addressing the housing crisis up here.
Kia ora. How's it all going? Yeah, good.
The first step involves recycling the homes and making them habitable again.
It's looking good, Uru.
Yep.
It's looking a lot better than what it was. Yep. You have to have an ability to look beyond all of this to see what it can look like, whether it's a house or whether it's people's futures. You have to be able to see the goodness in everything. Uru's not just a builder, although that's his skill. But that's not how I know him. I know Uru because Uru got a house from the trust.
We had nothing, and then Ricky gave us a chance, and now he's given us a home. Got a roof over our heads, and I'm very grateful for that.
The second step of Ricky's plan involves housing families, but it's about more than just putting a roof over their heads. Ultimately, the goal is to take people who are homeless and turn them into home owners within just 14 years. Families here pay $275 a week, most of which goes towards paying off the $160,000 cost of their house. Ricky hopes this is just the beginning. He wants to turn around a historic decline in Maori home ownership.
Our mission is assisting families to move from state housing dependence to housing independence.
What did you guys think the first time you saw this place?
We were excited because it's a dream for anybody.
Having a house?
Having a home.
Having a home.
To own.
What was your situation before you moved here?
We were living from house to house. Yeah, with our suitcases.
Leonie and Udu, who's originally from Papua New Guinea, tried making a go of it in Australia, but came back with their 2 kids when it didn't work out.
How did you find yourself in trouble when you came back?
There was a lack of rentals here. Looking for somewhere to live was stressful, with 2 young kids in tow.
Why?
Nobody wanted to rent to a couple with a 2 and a 3-year-old probably.
They applied for emergency accommodation with a social worker at Ricky's NGO.
And she put us down on a wait list and asked us what we were going to do if we didn't have anywhere to go, and I told her that we were going to live in a tent. Yeah, with our kids.
They were given emergency accommodation and the opportunity to join a home ownership program, learning about what it takes to own your own house.
The reality of home ownership is that if something breaks, you have to fix it. And you learn all of that. You learn about insurances, interest rates, what's a good rate, how to spend your money.
I found one! Whoa.
Here at Whare Ora, everyone signs up to strict rules. No alcohol, drugs or violence.
Yep, we live in the dream.
Country living.
How is the way that you're bringing your kids up here now different to the way you were brought up?
They're not brought up around alcohol, violence. Yeah. They're not brought up around any of that.
What's this?
Pasta.
That was your childhood?
Yep. I used to watch my mum get hidings and try and jump in and save her. Didn't want my children to be scared in their own home.
What does this home mean to you when you've grown up like that?
It means everything. To have security. It's a place that my children will run to. Anyone in my family, and not from.
You ran away from your home, but you know that your children will never have to run away from this one.
Yeah.
Ricky's dream has come a long way since he mortgaged his house. The He Korowai Trust now employs 27 staff with assets of over $6 million.
Good morning.
Although he's now got government backing, Ricky says he's still hamstrung by bureaucracy and a lack of funds.
Māori are not proud to be amongst the poorest, the most homeless people in such a beautiful, prosperous land that was sort of bequeathed to us from our ancestors. In fact, I know if they came back today and looked at the housing situation, they would say, "What the heck did you do? I left you with the best of everything." I've asked the government and Prime Minister to declare a state of emergency for Northland housing. I've told the government that I can fix it completely for $11 million. I will fix it. I will put 500 houses in Northland for $11 million. And it's as simple as that.
And what do they say?
They're silent. It's silence. The silence is almost deafening.